What's up, my friends? Welcome to this happy, beautiful Saturday where I'm going to read for you a little goodnight reading. We can do this. Overcoming the Political Divide and Creating the World We Want to Live in by yours truly. We've gotten to page 107. We're probably about, what would that be? A little over like a third, almost half. No, not quite half, but yeah, over a third of the way through the book. State of the Union, here we go. And so we'll see how far we get, and then I'll be off all through next week for a good old Joe Dispenza retreat, Joe Dispenza event. So enjoy this episode of this of We Can Do This. It's so fascinating to watch everything that's happening in politics these days. Danish media is clueless. It's going crazy. Bill Maher was just had a one-on-one with President Trump, and I don't know if you have seen that, but that was very interesting to see his experience. Like, it's so fascinating to try to suss out what's actually happening here. Like, once you get past this notion that everything needs to be true, everything you hear in the media has to be true, and the world has to be a certain way, and you can just be open to uncertainty, open to, I don't know what the fuck is going on. Like, is this good or bad? I don't know, right? The old Chinese man and the horse story. Like, I don't know if it's good or bad, but can we just observe it and just be fascinated? Like, if you just look at it as a TV show, it's the best fucking TV show ever. Best ever. It's the best timeline to be alive in ever. It's amazing. It's an amazing time to be alive. All right, so let's get to it. The State of the Union. I love the American people. I love the American idea. I'm in awe of the American Constitution. But man, have things gone off the rails over the past several decades. Americans spend more on health care than any other nation at any point in history. Let me do that over. Americans spend more on, quote, health, quote, care than any other nation at any point in history. Yet they're sicker, fatter, more anxious and depressed, and have more chronic illness than ever. There's the fertility crisis. Young couples have trouble making babies without medical treatment. Think about that. Making babies is critical to the survival of the species. 2 generations that cannot make babies and we're wiped out. This should be an all hands on deck emergency, but it's not. Americans spent trillions of dollars they didn't have to kill millions of people overseas, and there's no sign it's made the Americans safer or better off. The American middle class has been squished. A family of 4 used to be able to buy a house and live a good life on one income. That's impossible today. U.S. government debt is up from $16.6 trillion at the end of 2013 to $33.1 trillion at the end of 2023, doubling in 10 years. If you include unfunded Medicare, Social Security, and pension liabilities, you end up with about $166 trillion. And that's on top of all the taxes and fees paid to the government by citizens, corporations, and other taxpayers. Where did all that money go? Have you noticed a dramatic improvement in your life from this? If you owned assets, I bet you did well with those. But outside of that, I doubt it. The bottom line is that something's really wrong, and it's getting worse. Why are we putting up with this? How can all of this be happening and we, the people, aren't all pissed off at our elected officials for creating this mess and all on the same team about fixing this? I think there's a range of answers. Some people just aren't seeing it. The media is very selective in what they cover, and if the corporate media doesn't say it, they simply don't see it. Let me redo that. Those people. I'll clarify that sentence. The media is very selective in what they cover, and if the corporate media doesn't say it, those people simply don't see it. Or if they do see it somewhere on social media, they don't believe it because how could the media not cover it if it were true? Trust in the media is at an all-time low, and there's a reason why. Some people see it, but they think that these people are just super duper hard. Some people do see it, but they think that these problems are just super duper hard, and that's why it's getting worse despite some very caring and honest and competent politicians' best efforts. Spoiler, they're not. The solutions are simple and known. Some people think it's all because of the other side, and if only their side was in power, then everything would be great. Spoiler, that's how the blob keeps us fighting each other. Some people think that our politicians are just really bad at their jobs. They're trying, but they're just that dumb. The purpose of a system is what it does, which leads to the conclusion that there are some powerful dark forces who want things to be this way. And they are bribing and blackmailing people at every level of society to serve their agenda, which includes making all of us sick, stupid, depressed, and busy fighting each other so we don't notice all of their stealing and killing. It's sick, but it is what it is. We have to face reality. It's not incompetence, it's malice. And it's incompetence too. I'm not going to argue that. It's about power and exploitation. All the problems facing us have well-known, simple solutions. But the blob doesn't want our problems solved. The blob likes them just the way they are. Thank you very much. The only thing they'd like is to get rid of that pesky free speech so they wouldn't get exposed as much. That damn Constitution. What happens if we don't? If we don't wake up, grow up, and make change, things will only get worse. In order to pay taxes and keep up with inflation, you must work. If the government takes about half of your income, that's half of your life force energy taken from you at the threat of violence. And although some of it does get used to build bridges and roads and provide essential services like police and firefighters, most of it is wasted or funneled to the blob's friends. But that's not the worst part. What's worse is all the money that goes to make life worse for you and others. That makes you sicker, that kills innocent people here and abroad, that destabilizes regions, and many more problems that are made worse through the efforts of the government. Think about that. This is what's at stake. It's like if you were 200 pounds overweight. That is a massive toll on your system. It's a weight that you have to carry around with you every step you take. It causes metabolic dysfunction all over your body, which only makes you more overweight and more sick. This is what the government is effectively doing to all of us right now. And people are just going around like everything's fine. And this is just the way it is. We have totally normalized the most corrupt, dysfunctional system ever to exist in the history of mankind. We don't even stop to realize that things could be any different. What would be possible if you didn't have to carry this burden around? If you didn't have this sick and corrupt system leeching on your... If you didn't have this sick and corrupt system leeching on your creative life force. Think about that for a moment. It's wild. I know all of it sounds a bit intense, and it is. All right, that was that chapter. Well, I just want to add on this note, guys. This is not just America. This is all over the West. That we're like all of this energy has been siphoned off from us through taxes, through inflation, through government spending. That is not doing anything good. In fact, it's making everything worse. It's not just America, it's Europe as well. It happens in Europe too. Just want to make that clear. All right. One sec. Need to grab something in my email. All right. Here we go. All right. So next chapter is called Misconceptions. Here we go. Misconceptions. How do you know what you know? David Hume was a philosopher who lived in Scotland in the 1700s. David Hume. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by this. All right, turn off focus mode. Sorry, guys. David Hume was a philosopher who lived in Scotland in the 1700s. It seems like he was a real badass. In 1739, at the tender age of just 28, he shook the world when he pointed out the obvious, in hindsight, truth that we cannot know anything about the outside world for sure. Think about it. The only thing you can ever possibly know about reality comes from your senses. Sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell. That's it. I would add a sixth sense as well, or seventh or 30th sense, but let's just stick with the 5 in 3D world. But how do you know that they tell the truth? How do you know that I perceive the same thing that you do? How do you even know that I exist? There's no such thing as the world as it really is, independent of the human sensory apparatus. I'm colorblind. I see color differently from you, or so I've been told. But how can I truly know? How can I know how you see color? How can you know how I see color? We can't. We can only perceive the world through our own senses. My dog has different sensory equipment than I do. Her vision is worse, but her sense of smell is better. When we go for a walk, she loves to sniff. When I come back from a trip, she loves to sniff my... When I come back from a trip, she loves to sniff my eyes. I joke that she wants to smell what I've seen. My point is we cannot know anything about the objective outside world for sure. That's humbling. It's also really good news. It's also really good news because all of our source of suffering and conflict comes from believing that we can know anything for sure. When we add in the humility of realizing that we can't, it opens us up to new information and to each other. An open mind gives rise to an open heart. A closed mind equals a closed heart. Even something like science isn't ever proven to be true. To infinity. Some years ago, my friend Branimir recommended I read the book The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch. I was a bit skeptical because it seemed dry, but boy was I wrong. One of the most important books I've ever read. If you haven't read it, please do. It should be required reading in all schools. In Calvin Nation, it for sure will be, along with all of Byron Katie's books. Here's what he says. The desirable future is one where we progress from misconception to ever better. I'll do that over. Quote. The desirable future is one where we progress from misconception to ever better, meaning less mistaken, misconception. I often thought that the nature of science would be better understood if we called theories misconceptions from the outside instead of only after we've discovered their successors. Thus, we could say that Einstein's misconception of gravity was an improvement on Newton's misconception, which was an improvement on Kepler's. The neo-Darwinian misconception of evolution is an improvement on Darwin's misconception and his on Lamarck's. If people thought of it like that, perhaps no one would need to be reminded that science claims neither infallibility nor finality. I almost want to repeat this. Like, science claims neither infallibility nor finality. Well, actually, back to the script here. I did repeat that. That's funny. See, I'm second guessing myself. Science claims neither infallibility nor finality. Whenever they tell you the science is settled, you know they have no clue what they're talking about because science is never settled. They're trying to gaslight you. Sidebar, whatever they're talking about is not science in that case, right? Whatever they're now talking about is not science. Back. I love Deutsch's perspective because it reminds us to always keep an open mind. Stay curious. Keep searching for the truth. Whatever you currently believe is just your latest misconception. Hopefully it's better than your previous one, and hopefully it'll get replaced by an even better one in the future. Anything you read in this book is simply my best misconception to date. Tomorrow or next week or next year, hopefully I'll have a better one. That's how it should be. Never be so foolish as to believe that you found the final truth, because that would mean your openness to this. Never be so foolish as to believe that you find. Never be so foolish as to believe that you found the final truth, because that would mean your openness to discovery had ended. Open mind equals open heart. Keep both of them open. Habits of nature. One of the points that British scientist Rupert Sheldrake makes is that what we call laws of nature may in fact just be habits. We call them laws, But can we really, we call them laws, but can we really know that they are? Of course we cannot. Just because every single swan we've ever seen was white doesn't mean that a black swan doesn't or cannot exist. Claiming they're laws is an assumption, not a fact. Think about that. That's just, how could you know it's a law? You can't, right? Unless you can decode where the law is written, but you can't. You can only see the effect of the quote unquote law. So we can't know it might be a law, but we can't know that. Back to the script. And that's okay. We have to make gross simplifications, generalizations, and assumptions in order to function in the world. It's normal, natural, and healthy. Just don't mistake the map for the territory. What hurts you is not what you don't know. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. The power of language. Notice how this is something that is easy to reason your way to. And yet you'll hear journalists, experts, politicians, even scientists say that the science is settled or the laws of nature. Even though in just a couple of paragraphs, we were able to realize that cannot be. This should give you a sense of just how pervasive the web of inaccurate thinking is. We're so easy to manipulate via language. Terence McKenna said, "The real secret of magic is that the world is made up of words." The real secret of magic is that the world is made up of words. And if you know the words that the world is made up of, you can make of it whatever you wish. We live inside prisons made up of words. A better misconception. What makes one misconception better than another? The best misconception is the one that is more useful. Does it predict the future better? Does it make us take better action? Then it's a better misconception. Results follow actions. If we want a certain result, we have to take the correct actions that will produce that result. Let's say you want to be healthy and fit. One person's misconception is that eating low-fat processed foods and taking prescription meds is the way to get there. Another person's misconception is that eating only clean, organic, whole foods in limited quantities, exercising regularly, and staying away from any processed foods or pharma products is the way to get there. After a period, we can measure and see how well each theory is predicting and producing the desired result. Whichever does the best job is the better of the two. We split test, pick a winner, and then we can form a new hypothesis and test against the control. That's how human progress is made. But it only works if we're free to make hypotheses and experiment. If there are taboos, no-go zones, and forbidden questions, then we're stunting our progress and our growth, which is why free speech is so crucial. Next chapter. All right, we're zipping through this thing. Trust in government. Trust in government. Here we go. It's a fun one. Trust in government. There are two big elements that separate the blue pill and the red pill worldviews. Trust in the government and trust in the media. Here's how I came. Yeah. Excuse me, guys. Got my breakfast there. Cheers. Here's how I came to the conclusion that we cannot trust our government. JFK. Why not start with JFK? What the hell did happen to JFK? Honestly, a popular American president is murdered in broad daylight in front of everybody. The government tells us an obvious bullshit lie about who did it. The media covers it up. The CIA invents the label conspiracy theorist to smear anyone who questions the government's blatant lie. The government continues to keep documents sealed for another 61 years and counting, and everybody just acts like everything's normal. What in the actual fuck? I don't know who killed JFK. I don't know why they killed him. I don't know exactly how they killed him. Was he murdered because he refused to
Was he murdered because he refused to invade Cuba, despite the CIA trying to force his hands via the Bay of Pigs invasion? Was he murdered by forces in the military because he crossed the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower had just warned about? Was he murdered by forces in the military because he crossed the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower had just warned us about in his farewell address when he didn't want to escalate in Vietnam and established direct communication with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev? Was he murdered by Texan oilmen because he wanted to limit the oil depletion allowance, which he viewed as an unfair tax break for wealthy oil companies, which angered George Bush and his friend Lyndon B. Johnson? Was he murdered by the Mossad because he wouldn't let Israel develop nuclear weapons and Lyndon B. Johnson would? Was he murdered by the CIA because he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 people? I'll do the previous one over. Was he murdered by the Mossad because he wouldn't let Israel develop nuclear weapons and Lyndon B. Johnson would? Was he murdered by the CIA because he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 people? Was he murdered by the CIA because he wanted to, quote, splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds, end quote? As Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said in 2017, quote, you take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you, end of quote. All of these have been claimed. All of them are plausible. I've seen credible reports that the CIA, the Mossad, his own vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson. I've seen credible reports that the CIA, the Mossad, his own vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, and George Bush Sr. were behind it. Chances are they all were, since they all benefited greatly from his death. I don't know the truth, and we might never know the truth. What I do know is that someone killed him. Someone knows who killed him. Lots of people helped to cover it up, and the government is still covering it up. If the government wasn't involved, why haven't they released all the files by now? Everyone who did it are long dead, so if it was individuals, there's no reason to keep the files sealed. Ergo, it must be government institutions. This is your government, paid for by your money, working for you, murdering your president, and blatantly lying to you. While preaching about democracy and free speech and the rules-based order and blah, blah, blah. Come on. And this, my friend, is the pattern you see everywhere. Remember, the bigger the lie, the harder it is to believe it's a lie. The pattern. The pattern is simple. Something big and crazy happens. JFK, RFK, MLK, 9/11, Manson murders, Las Vegas shooting, Mueller investigation, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Jeffrey Epstein, Sean Combs, COVID, 2020 election, January 6th, George Floyd, BLM, MH370. And these are just the ones that I've looked into. How many more are there? Kind of makes you think if anything bad ever happens, that the government kind of makes you think. Let me rewrite that. Kind of makes you think, does anything ever happen? Sorry. Kind of makes you think, does anything bad ever happen that the government isn't behind? In each and every case, we're told the official narrative early on before it can really be known, and that narrative is hammered home again and again. None of the official explanations make sense if you think about them for even just a few minutes. The government never releases all the data. The media never does any deep research or analysis. Instead, we're told a bunch of lies. The government loses, confiscates, destroys. The government, quote unquote, loses, confiscates, destroys, or withholds critical evidence while prosecuting and punishing whistleblowers. Who reveal inconvenient truths. There's no real investigation or honest attempt at discovery from either the media or the government. When questions get uncomfortable, the media stops covering the story. The government stops answering questions, and instead, they launch smear campaigns to label you or destroy your credibility. Anyone who questions the official narrative is labeled conspiracy theorist or election denier or climate denier or some other label designed to silence them. Often we're sent on wild goose chases with crazy stories that turn out to be false and most likely seeded by the blob. The moment someone falls for one of the stories, it's used to ridicule that person and make people scared to believe anything. If the people with critical questions and inconvenient facts keep persisting, they have a strange tendency to commit suicide, drown in bathtubs, or suffer random tragic accidents. Like cars that just suddenly speed up and smash into something. Back to the script. Everything's settled. We're done. Case closed. Time to move on. Turn the page. Look forward, not back. The questions never get answered. My heuristic is that if the government isn't 100% forthcoming with information, honest in their search for the truth, or their official explanations makes no sense, we have to assume that they're at least complicit. Individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty. The government must be presumed guilty until they prove their innocence. And they prove their innocence by releasing everything and letting the public comb through it. This, of course, never happens. Conspiracy theorist. The media loves labeling anything that counters the official lie a conspiracy theory, and anyone talking about them, conspiracy theorists. As the saying goes on Red Pilled X, the difference between conspiracy theory and reality used to be 18 months, now it's about 6. It turns out that the term conspiracy theory was a deliberate CIA effort to discredit people who didn't buy the Warren Commission's ridiculous claims about the magic bullet required to frame the murder on Lee Harvey Oswald as a lone gunman. I'm talking about the murder of JFK. From Lance DeHaven Smith's book, Conspiracy Theory in America, quote, "The Rosetta Stone for understanding the origins and use of the conspiracy theory labels is the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The conspiracy theory label took form and gained meaning over a period of several years or longer in the context of efforts by the CIA, one of the world's leading experts in psychological warfare, to deflect accusations that officials at the highest levels of American government were complicit in Kennedy's murder. Although the Warren Commission did not use the exact phrase, it referred repeatedly to the issue of conspiracy or questions of conspiracy and similar constructions, and it focused its inquiry on whether Lee Harvey Oswald had been acting on his own or instead had received help. The more compact phrasing, conspiracy theory, gained currency as a name pushed by the CIA for any and all theories that rejected the official account that Kennedy had been killed by a lone gunman. The CIA's campaign to popularize the term conspiracy theory and make conspiracy belief a target of ridicule and hostility must be credited, unfortunately, with being one of the most successful propaganda initiatives of all time. Although most Americans today reject the official lone gunman account of the Kennedy assassination, they also have doubts about conspiracy theories and those who believe them." End quote. Pretty interesting, yes? Again, your government used your money to gaslight you and label you for asking legitimate questions about the murder of your democratically elected president. Something's pretty fucked up. So, who's behind all of this? The Blob. Think of the Blob as the man behind the curtain from The Wizard of Oz. It's a term coined by Mike Benz. Follow him on X, he's a hoot. I used it for the shadowy force that controls our government and our media and so much more. It involves three-letter agencies like CIA, FBI, DHS, NIH, and so on. International Intelligence Agency, but also international intelligence agencies, the military-industrial complex, the medical-industrial complex, the State Department, Mexican drug cartels, the mafia, and Drangheta, and other organized crime all over the world. I used to believe the president's in charge and that it's a battle between... Democrats and Republicans and maybe independents and libertarians. It is so not. My research suggests that the Blob effectively controls corporate media, social media, both political parties, Hollywood, the music industry, the Vatican, and more or less all important parts of the permanent state bureaucracy. But who are the people who control the Blob? I don't know. I'm not going to tell you that it's the Illuminati or the Rothschilds or the Freemasons or the Jews or the Rockefellers. It might be all of those or none of those. I just don't know. I don't think it's a thing. I don't think it's a single well-defined set of people pulling all the strings. I think it's pretty amorphous, and I thought of it as just well aligned. I think it's pretty amorphous. And a lot of it is just well-aligned incentives and inertia. But some of it is absolutely intentional and malicious. Exactly who it is and who's pulling the strings is less important than clearly seeing how it operates. The blob keeps us sick, disoriented, and focused on things that anger and divide us, so that we spend our energy on bullshit drama and don't notice that they're stealing our money and our life force energy and effectively enslaving us. The real battle is not left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. The real battle is the people versus the blob. That's the battle line. When we fight each other, we're playing right into the hands of the blob. The big question before us is, do we let the blob continue to control our institutions, kill millions, and impoverish and enslave large swaths of the population? Or do we connect with each other, recognize that we have the power, and together create a world of truth and integrity, of happiness, health, safety, and prosperity? That's the question we need to answer. But most people have no clue. They think it's about this policy or that policy or some slogan they heard on TV. It is so not. The Emperor. It's just like the story of the Emperor's new clothes. A classic. You guys having a good time? I'm having a great time. It's just like the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, a classic fairy tale from 1837 by Hans Christian Andersen. In the story, an emperor who's obsessed with his appearance is tricked by two swindlers posing as weavers. They promise to make him the most magnificent clothes, which are invisible to anyone unfit for their position or unusually stupid. The truth is, they make no clothes at all. But the emperor, his ministers, and everyone else around him are so vain, have such fragile egos, and are so scared of ridicule that they pretend to see the clothes to avoid being seen as incompetent or stupid. When the emperor parades through the town in his new fancy clothes, people also pretend to admire the invisible outfit, until, suddenly, a child loudly exclaims, "But he's not wearing any clothes!" Only then does the crowd realize the truth. Even so, the emperor, too proud to admit the deception, continues his procession as if nothing is wrong. This story speaks directly to the red pill, blue pill question. It's as relevant today as it was when it was written 187 years ago. How little human nature has changed. It takes so much courage to speak the obvious truth right before your eyes, when you and everyone around you are shamed into compliance. I wish to be like the child in that story. It's only appropriate that both its author and myself are from Denmark. Let's look under the hood at some more ways that the blob operates. The CIA. The CIA is a major part of the blob. We don't know a lot about the CIA. Well, let me do that over. We don't know a lot about the CIA by design. It's covert. But we did learn some things during the Church Committee in 1975. That's 49 years ago. 50 now. According to Wikipedia, quote, the most shocking revelations of the committee include Operation MK Ultra, which involved the drugging and torture of unwitting US citizens as part of human experiments in Operation MK Ultra, which involved the drugging and torture of unwitting US citizens as part of human experimentation on mind control. Like, the government actually did this. And you can read, and it's documented. They destroyed most of the documents. And it's on Wikipedia. And people are not like, what the fuck? All right, moving on. COINTELPRO, which involved the surveillance and infiltration of American political and civil rights organizations. Family Jewels, a CIA program to covertly assassinate foreign leaders, and Operation Mockingbird, a systematic propaganda campaign with domestic and foreign journalists operating as CIA assets and dozens of U.S. news organizations providing cover for CIA activity, confirming earlier stories that charged that the CIA had cultivated relationships with private institutions, including the press. Without identifying individuals by name, the Church Committee stated that it found 50 journalists who had official but secret relationships with the CIA. End of quote. So we know for a fact that the CIA has drugged and tortured unwitting U.S. citizens as part of human experimentation on mind control. Oh, and they destroyed most of the documents to try and hide the truth from the citizens. Okay, sounds pretty bad. We also know they surveilled and infiltrated American political groups, illegally, I might add, including presidents and elected officials. Also, not so great. We know they assassinated foreign leaders. That also sounds fairly bad. JFK would not approve. And we know they fucked with the media at home and abroad to make sure they wouldn't mess with the CIA's ability to do their dirty business. Okay, there's a lot of they. I mean, to rewrite that to be more clear. And we know they fucked with the CIA. And we know they fuck with the media at home and abroad to make sure the media wouldn't mess with the CIA's ability to do their... And we know they fuck with the media at home and abroad to make sure the media wouldn't mess with the CIA's ability to do their dirty business. And that's just what we know they did 50 years ago. What have they been doing since? Great question. Seems like we should know, but we don't. Let's look into a few of these programs. MK Ultra. Project MK Ultra is especially shocking. From Wikipedia. And guys, you can go look this up. If you haven't looked this up, I don't know what you're doing. Like, you got to look at this stuff. You just got to look at it. Just look it straight in the eyes. Quote, the program engaged in illegal activities, including the use of U.S. and Canadian citizens as unwitting test subjects. MKUltra's scope was broad, with activities carried out under the guise of research at more than 80 institutions, 80 institutions, aside from the military, including colleges and universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. The CIA operated using front organizations, although some top officials at these institutions were aware of the CIA's involvement. Most MKUltra records were destroyed in 1973 by order of CIA Director Richard Helms. So it has been difficult for investigators to gain a complete understanding of the more than 150 funded research subprojects sponsored by MKUltra and related CIA programs. Sidebar here. Do you see, like, the CIA destroys their own records so that the public and the legislators and all our elected officials won't find out what the fuck they were doing. Can you see how this is like a completely rogue agency? Completely rogue. And it's going to get worse, but we'll get there. Back to the quote from Wikipedia about MKUltra. Some historians assert that one goal of MKUltra and related CIA projects was to create a Manchurian Candidate-style subject. American historian Alfred W. McCoy has claimed that the CIA attempted to focus media attention on these sorts of ridiculous programs so that the public would not look at the researchers' primary goal, which was effective methods of interrogation. Maybe not. But we've definitely seen like the Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, the whoever tried to murder Trump last year in July 13 Butler, like all of these are like very mature and candidate like people. All right, back to the manuscript here. And end quote from Wikipedia. Whoa. Illegal, destroying records, 80 different institutions involved, direct involvement and cover up by the CIA director, and developing killers who can kill on command with no recollection of their deeds. In his fascinating book, Chaos, Tom O'Neill traces the history of the Charles Manson murders. Not being from this country, I didn't know too much about them, but the 2019 Quentin Tarantino movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, was based on this event. Charles Manson was the charismatic leader of a cult that ended up committing some really conspicuous murders. In O'Neill's investigation, it turns out Manson had ties to the CIA, and that the whole thing was most likely part of MKUltra as a way to both experiment with mind control through LSD and other drugs, and as a way to end the Summer of Love vibes. Here's a passage from the book. Quote, a few years earlier, the evocatively titled Operation Midnight Climax had seen CIA operatives open at least 3 Bay Area safe houses disguised as upscale bordellos, kitted out with one-way mirrors and kinky photographs. Kitted out with one-way mirrors and kinky photographs. A spy named George Hunter White and his colleagues hired prostitutes to entice prospective Johns to the homes where the men were served cocktails laced with acid. White scrupulously observed the ensuing activities, whatever they were. The goal was to see if LSD paired with sex could be used to coax sensitive information from the men, something of a psychedelic honeypot experiment. White so enjoyed the proceedings that he had a portable toilet and a mini fridge installed on his side of the mirror so he could watch the action and swill martinis without taking a bathroom break. He later wrote to his CIA handler, "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, and cheat, steal, deceive, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest? Pretty good stuff, brother. Your government and your tax dollars hard at work to keep you safe." End quote. Okay, back to the book, quoting from the book. In 1949, at the Nuremberg trials that adjudicated the crimes of World War II, the United States adopted the International Code for Human Experimentation. A person must give full and informed consent before being used as a subject. MKUltra scientists flouted this code constantly, remorselessly, and in ways that stupefied the imagination. Their work encompassed everything from electronic brain stimulation to sensory deprivation to induced pain and psychosis. They sought ways to cause heart attacks, severe twitching, and intense cluster headaches. If drugs didn't do the trick, they'd try to master ESP, ultrasonic vibrations, and radiation poisoning. One project tried to harness the power of magnetic fields. Operated on a strict need-to-know basis, MKUltra was so highly classified that when John McCain... Wait. John McCone? I think it's this John McCone, right? What? One sec. Yeah. Okay. Do that over. Operated on a strict need-to-know basis, MKUltra was so highly classified that when John McCone succeeded Dulles as CIA director late in 1961, he was not informed of its existence. End of quote. Your government remorselessly violating the Nuremberg Code. Good to know. Back to the quote from the Chaos book. 3 government investigations followed, all hobbled by the CIA's destruction of its files. When records were available, they were redacted. When witnesses were summoned, they were forgetful. First came the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission, each mentioned earlier regarding chaos and COINTELPRO. The Church Committee's final report unveiled a 1957 internal evaluation of MKUltra by CIA's Inspector General. Precautions must be taken, the document warned, to conceal these activities from the American public in general. The knowledge that the agency is engaging in unethical and illicit activities would have serious repercussions. End quote. Your government hard at work trying to hide what they're doing so you never find out. This kind of thing happens again and again. Destruction of evidence. After the Mueller investigation into Russian collusion of the Trump administration ended, no less than 27 phones used by the team were wiped before they could be reviewed. As long as government officials can get off free by claiming to have accidentally lost evidence, they're going to continue to do so. In my view, that should be cause for an instant jail sentence. I don't care whether it was accidental or not. This is property belonging to the people, and as a steward of the best interests of the people, you better take real good care of their property and be prepared to demonstrate that you are indeed worthy of their trust. In the summer of 2024, it came out that Fauci and others at NIH had learned from their so-called FOIA lady how to circumvent FOIA requests or Freedom of Information Act requests. FOIA requests are a critical way that the public gets to know what the government is actually doing for or against them. And in this case, Fauci and others were deliberately working to prevent the public from learning what they were up to. Quote, further evidence shows that Dr. Fauci's former chief of staff, Greg Folkers, also utilized FOIA evading tactics by strategically misspelling words. This evasion tactic ensures that when the NIH searches its email servers for keywords that are responsive to a FOIA request, Mr. Folkers' emails about that contain the misspelled keyword are not. Mr. Folkers' emails that contain the misspelled keyword are not identified or produced as a responsive document. End of quote. They also used private email accounts and knew to not commit sensitive details to email and to delete the emails should they slip up. Quote, I learned from our FOIA sick, well, I'm just gonna, there's like brackets. This is like a advanced quote kind of thing. I'll just try to read it as good as I can. I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I'm FOIA'd, but before the search starts. He, meaning Dr. David Morans, a former NIAID senior advisor to Fauci, wrote in a February 24, 2021 email sent from his private Gmail account. Plus, I deleted most of those earlier emails after sending them to Gmail. We're all smart enough to know to never have smoking guns, and if we did, we wouldn't put them in emails, and if we found them, we'd delete them. Morans also said on June 16, 2020. End of quote. Again, that should be an instant jail sentence. It doesn't matter whether there was any underlying crime that you try to cover up. The attempt to prevent the people that you're paid to serve from finding out what you're up to is the crime. Alas, that's not how things are currently run. The people in charge get away with all kinds of crimes and no one is holding them accountable. Except when it's convenient for the blob to bring up some old crime because it's time to get rid of that person, like what seems to have happened with New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. And is happening at the time of this writing with New York City Mayor Eric Adams. I'm not saying that these people didn't do bad things. In the case of, In the case of Cuomo, he killed lots of old people by forcing them back into nursing homes when they... In the case of Cuomo, he killed lots of old people by forcing infected patients... I'll rewrite it like this. In the case of Cuomo, he killed lots of old people by forcing patients with COVID back into nursing homes. Old people being one of the top categories of people impacted by the disease. Old people being one of the top categories of people impacted by COVID. Let's do it that way. Old people being one of the top categories of people impacted by COVID. And Eric Adams, I'm sure, is as corrupt as they come. I think it's hard to become mayor of New York City unless you are. But the timing of these allegations, right as he was about to go to D.C. to confront the Biden... But the timings... But the timing of the allegations against him, right as he was about to go to D.C. to confront the Biden administration on their open border policies, is suspicious, to say the least. Back to MK Ultra, though, another quote from Chaos. Quote, Sidney Gottlieb's, which is the head of MK Ultra, destruction of the MK Ultra files was a federal crime. It was investigated by the Justice Department in 1976, but according to the Times, quietly dropped. His brutal courses of experimentation broke any number of laws, and his perjury that day did too. But he was never prosecuted. He testified before the Senate only under the condition that he receive total criminal immunity. As for those 16,000 new pages, They were mainly financial records, but a few more tantalizing documents found the CIA explicating its ambitions. Can we obtain control of the future activities, physical and mental, of any individual, willing or unwilling, with a guarantee of amnesia, they asked. Can we force an individual to act against his own moral concepts? And can an individual be made to perform an act of attempted assassination? End quote. These are all from actual CIA documents. Tells you what they're trying to do. All them lone gunmen. Can an individual be made to perform an act of attempted assassination? And can we guarantee that they have no memory of having done it? That's a great question. Because when you look into the history of assassinations in the US, this is a pattern that comes up again and again. Remember Jack Ruby, the guy who conveniently killed Lee Harvey Oswald before he could testify and tell us how he was set up as a patsy? Turns out that before Jack Ruby could testify in front of the Warren Commission, the commission that was tasked with getting to the bottom of what happened with JFK, he was visited in his jail cell. Jack Ruby was visited in his jail cell by none other than MK Ultra operative Dr. Louis Joyland West, also known as Jolly, from the book Chaos. Quote, after John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November 1963, West psychiatrically examined Jack Ruby, who'd murdered Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. Not long before Ruby was due to testify for the Warren Commission, West examined him alone in his jail cell. He emerged to report that Ruby had suffered an acute psychotic break. Sure enough, Ruby's testimony before the commission succeeded only in making him sound unhinged. He could never fully explain why he decided to kill Oswald. End quote. Was Jack Ruby a Manchurian candidate? It's plausible. Isn't it crazy? Isn't it fucking crazy? There's also Sirhan Sirhan, the guy who allegedly murdered JFK's brother and Attorney General under JFK, Robert F. Kennedy, or RFK. His son, RFK Jr., was running for president in 2024 before joining forces with Trump. And now, of course, he's the Secretary of Health, HHS. I'm going to get some air in here. From a Washington Post article from June 5, 2018, headlined, Who Killed Bobby Kennedy? His son, RFK Jr., doesn't believe it was Sirhan Sirhan. Quote, though Sirhan admitted at his trial in 1969 that he shot Kennedy, he claimed from the start that he had no memory of doing so. And midway through Sirhan's trial, prosecutors provided his lawyers with an autopsy report that launched 5 decades of controversy. Kennedy was shot at point blank range from behind, including a fatal shot behind his ear. But Sirhan, a 24-year-old Palestinian immigrant, was standing in front of him. Sirhan's appeals have been rejected at every level as recently as 2016, even with the courts considering new evidence that has emerged over the years that as many as 13 shots were fired. Sirhan's gun held only 8 bullets, and that Sirhan may have been subjected to coercive hypnosis, in a real-life version of The Manchurian Candidate. End quote. See the pattern? Sirhan had no memory of killing RFK. He was subjected to coercive hypnosis. Given the autopsy, he couldn't have possibly killed RFK. Given the number of bullets fired, he could not have been the only gunman. And yet, he was convicted. Lone, crazy gunman. Case closed. Stop asking questions. There's a parallel to the recent assassination attempts on Donald Trump. I haven't looked too deeply into them, but from what I've seen, they fit the pattern. Lots of questions, lots of ties to the blob, and lots of obfuscation from the government. And let me add that. And lots of obfuscation from the government and zero interest from the media. If the government truly wanted to get to the bottom of what happened, they wouldn't they would investigate incessantly, share their data, and invite the public to help out. Of course, they never do that. I highly recommend that you read Chaos for yourself, but it gets worse. All right, what page are we on? 131. Let me just see here. I need something to yeah. All right, we'll keep going. Still mid chapter, but I just need a quick something to drink for a sec here. I'll be right back. All right, here we go. I have this CO2 meter in my office, so I can see when the CO2 level gets too high. I need to open the window. It's not a big room here, so I guess I breathe a lot, and and all the CO2 gets in the room. All right, we got to page 132. Operation Gladio. The book Operation Gladio by Paul L. Williams totally blew my mind. The main claim of the book is that after the Second World War, a secret project was established to have agents stay behind in Europe to prevent Europe from falling to the communists. However, the thing that stood out to me is the claim that in order to fund this operation, the CIA engaged in drug trade, starting with selling heroin to black people in New York City and later expanding into cocaine and other drugs, as well as to other ethnicities and geographic regions. In short, the CIA runs the world's drug trade, and they do it in collaboration with organized crime around the world. Great! Your government at work for you. In short, the CIA is two peas in a pod with the drug cartels and other organized crime around the world, and they happen to effectively be in control of the world's most powerful military through blackmail of elected officials. That's quite the red pill. However, it's well backed up by facts both in this book and in other places. Gary Webb was an investigative journalist who in 1996 wrote a series of articles in the San Jose Mercury News titled Dark Alliance about the CIA's involvement in the crack cocaine trade in LA. He died in 2004 at the age of 49 from 2 gunshot wounds to his head. It was deemed a suicide. Suicide with 2 gunshot wounds. Think about that for a second. Another person critical of the blob who turned out to be suicidal. Curious. Here's a few quotes from Operation Gladio claiming that the U.S. created ISIS. Quote, Gordon Duff, senior editor of Veterans Today, alleges that the ISIS terrorists were organized in Jordan and Syria by Senator John McCain, U.S. Major General retired Paul E. Vallely, and other military consultants. Vallely is a Fox News military analyst and the founder of the U.S. Army Psychological Warfare School. Support for Duff's assertion comes from investigative journalist Aaron Klein, who has unearthed evidence that the ISIS forces are trained at a secret U.S. military base in the Jordanian town of Safawi.
The ISIS forces are trained at a secret U.S. military base in the Jordanian town of Safawi. This report has been corroborated by Der Spiegel, Germany's leading news magazine. Additional confirmation comes from Edward Snowden, the NSA whistleblower, who has produced classified government documents that show that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, is a CIA operative. Huh, okay, end quote. So ISIS is another CIA operation. Why, though? Quote, according to several news analysts, the purpose of ISIS is to create a state of endless war that will serve to exhaust Saudi and Iranian military resources and to bring about the dissolution of Syria and Iraq into small states that can be manipulated by the US-dominated money cartel, which seeks control of their natural resources. This thesis is supported by classified CIA documents that affirm that arms for ISIS came, compliments of the CIA, from the arsenal of Muammar Gaddafi. The shipment of these weapons to ISIS in Syria was supervised in 2012 by David Petraeus, the CIA director who would soon resign when it was alleged that he was having an affair with his biographer. End quote. Oh, so we can have endless wars and steal natural resources from countries around the world. Maybe we should have taken Eisenhower's farewell address more seriously. Quote, when the U.S. military occupation of Afghanistan became precarious, the CIA worked with the Mexican drug cartels to develop poppy fields throughout the mountains of Mexico's west coast. By 2013, heroin and cocaine from Mexico, with a street value of $3 billion, flooded Chicago. The drugs arrived by land, rail, and air, including 747 jetliners. When Jesus Vicente Zambada Niebla, I don't know, when Jesus Vicente Zambada Niebla, a member of the Sinaloa cartel, was collared by Chicago police officials, he claimed to be a CIA operative under government protection. His trial was halted by federal prosecutors on the basis of the Classified Information Procedures Act. The prosecutors claimed that Niebla's testimony would constitute a threat to national security. End quote. It's crazy. Oh, so the CIA is doing drug trade in partnership with the Mexican drug cartels, who also happen to be involved in human trafficking, and the Biden administration has been massively expanding border crossings. Interesting. The book subtitle, meaning the Operation Gladio book, subtitle is, quote, The Unholy Alliance Between the Vatican, the CIA, and the Mafia, end quote. According to the book, as the drug money started to roll in, they needed a way to launder it. The answer was the Vatican, whose bank has no oversight. He claims that the CIA has been in control of the Pope and the Vatican for a long time. When Pope John Paul I became Pope, he issued a call for reform, quote, nevertheless, reliable sources contend that the new Pope was moved to action as he learned more and more about the inner workings of Vatican, Inc. According to author David Yallop, John Paul announced on September 28 his decision to remove Archbishop Marcinkus from the IOR, meaning the Vatican Bank, to transfer Cardinal Baggio to the diocese. How do you pronounce that? Diocese? I don't know how to pronounce that. Diocese. Okay. Thank you, Google. To transfer Cardinal Baggio to the Diocese of Florence and to force Cardinal Villot into retirement. This contention is supported by declassified documents from the U.S. Department of State and the CIA. The morning after John Paul made these alleged announcements, he was found dead under conditions that continue to baffle investigators. At 4:30 a.m., Sister Vincenza, following her morning routine, knocked at the door of the papal bedchambers and left a pot of coffee on a table in the hallway.
When she returned a half hour later, she found the tray untouched. After knocking at the door and receiving no reply, she called out, Buonasera, Papa. The room was still. Entering the room, she found the Pope sitting up in bed with his eyeglasses half off his nose. His fingers were clutched around a file, and papers were strewn among the bed covers. As soon as she approached him, Sister Vincenza reeled back in horror. The Pope's lips were pulled back in a macabre grimace. His gums were exposed, and his eyes appeared to have popped from their sockets. End quote. And of course, there are lots of unanswered questions around the autopsy and the cause of death. The book closes with this. Quote, from the time of its inception, Gladio was fueled by heroin. The reliance produced a plague that has spread throughout the civilized world. The illicit gains of the CIA from trafficking were originally washed in the Holy See. But the Vatican Bank became capable of handling the flood of revenue that poured into the bastion of Nicholas V. New financial institutions were established to serve as laundries. Let me look this up because I think it should say incapable. Let me look that up real quick, you guys. Just going to find the actual quote here in the book. It's so hard to wrap your head around just how depraved and sick this whole thing is. Yeah, that's what it says in the book, but I think it should say incapable, but let's just keep going. But the Vatican Bank became capable of handling the flood of revenue that poured into the bastion of Nicholas V. Or that poured into the bastion of Nicholas V. I think that's what it should say. I don't know. New financial institutions were established to serve as laundries, including the Castle Bank and Trust in Miami, the Nugan Hand Bank in Sydney, and the Bank of Commerce and Credit in Karachi. But even these banks proved insufficient to handle the billions of dollars in ill-gotten gains. And so the dirty money began to flow through major American banks, including Citibank, American Express of Beverly Hills, Manufacturers Bank, the Great American Bank, Chemical Bank, and Chase Manhattan. Where I bank, by the way. Yay! The CIA's reliance on La Cosa Nostra also changed, and the agency, by creating Gladio II, became compelled to forge new alliances with the Latin American cartels, the Babas and Grey Wolves of Turkey, street gangs within America's inner cities, and the Albanian mafia, who emerged almost overnight as the leading crime outfit in the United States. And so Gladio goes on to advance the interests of an Anglo-American money cartel. It will persist on the winds of war as long as the affairs of men are governed by covetousness and greed. It matters not that a handful of people might draw back the curtain to reveal figures with bloody swords. End quote. How big is the lie? Very big. Very big. Operation Mockingbird. Mockingbird is the CIA project to control the media that we learned about during the Church Committee hearing in 1975. It's described in Operation Gladio as well. Quote, the CIA under Allen Dulles initiated Operation Mockingbird in 1953. This operation involved recruiting leading journalists and editors to fabricate stories and create smokescreens in order to cast the agency's agenda in a positive light. Among the news executives taking part were William Paley of the Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS, Henry Luce of Time Inc., Arthur Hayes Sulzberger of the New York Times, Barry Bingham Sr. of the Louisville Courier Journal, and James Cobley of Cobley Press. Entire news organizations eventually became part of Mockingbird, including the American Broadcasting Company, ABC, the National Broadcasting Company, NBC, the Associated Press, United Press International, Reuters, Hearst Newspapers, Scripps Howard, Newsweek, the Mutual Broadcasting System, the Miami Herald, the Saturday Evening Post, and the New York Herald Tribune. With over 400 journalists now involved, along with mainstream news outlets, the agency could operate without fear of exposure. End quote. And as we saw, Operation Mockingbird is not limited to just American media. Did it end in 1975? Probably not. Most likely, they only got better at it over the years. We know from the Twitter files that were released after Elon Musk bought Twitter that the CIA and other blob agencies were deeply involved in censoring and monitoring communications on Twitter and other social media platforms. In August of 2024, Mark Zuckerberg admitted that the government pressured Meta to censor content during the COVID-19 pandemic. It seems highly likely that the blob is effectively in control of Meta and Google and all of their platforms, and probably others, and that they hate Elon precisely because he won't let them control X. Whenever I travel to my home country of Denmark, I can't help but notice how one-sided the media is in their coverage of US politics. There's no Fox News, there's no Rush Limbaugh, Breitbart, The Daily Wire, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, or Joe Rogan over there. People get their news from the corporate media, aka Operation Mockingbird, and that's the story they believe in. Denmark is ranked as the least corrupt country in the world, and as hard as it is for Americans to wrap their heads around the level of corruption, I think it's even harder for Danes. Nixon and Watergate. If the blob can assassinate a president and get away with it, what else can they do? Well, they can oust one through lawfare, as happened with Nixon. Most people have heard of Watergate. The official story is this: a US president running for re-election arranges a break-in into the headquarters of the opposing party to find stuff he can use to win. Nixon tried to cover the whole affair up, but was finally forced to resign because of the smoking gun tape, where he admitted on tape that he was trying to cover it up. Except, we now know that Nixon was framed and the real crook was John Dean. The break-in did take place and the burglars did get caught, but Nixon had no involvement or knowledge of it, nor did he try to cover it up after the fact. 5 out of 7 burglars had ties to the CIA, which suggests the CIA might have been involved. We also know that the famous Deep Throat, who leaked information to journalists, quote unquote, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, was none other than Mark Felt, the associate director of the FBI. When Felt's boss, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, died in 1972, Felt expected to be promoted as next in line. Instead, Nixon appointed L. Patrick Gray to the role. Was Watergate Felt's revenge over being snubbed? But Woodward himself is also very suspicious. He had essentially no career as a journalist before Watergate, coming straight from the Navy and the Pentagon, where he'd previously been exposed to classified information. He joined the Washington Post shortly before breaking the Watergate scandal. My guess is he was placed there as a reliable mouthpiece. Jeff Shepard, who was working for Nixon at the time, and was the one who transcribed the famous smoking gun tape, has been studying the case for 50 years. Thanks to recently declassified documents, he has thoroughly documented that Nixon was indeed framed, making this another coup against the sitting, democratically elected U.S. president. Shepard's film Watergate Secrets, as well as his book The Nixon Conspiracy, Watergate and the Plot to Remove the President, go into detail on this. From the book blurb, quote, Shepard reveals the untold story of how a flawed but honorable president... Shepard reveals the untold story of how a flawed but honorable president was needlessly brought down by a corrupt deep state big media alliance. A circumstance that looks all too familiar today. In this hard-hitting expose, Shepard reveals the real smoking gun, the prosecutor's secret but erroneous roadmap, which caused grand jurors to name Nixon a co-conspirator in the Watergate cover-up,
and the House Judiciary Committee to adopt its primary articles of impeachment, end quote. A president who had just won in a 49-state landslide with 520 out of 538 electoral votes was ousted by the deep state. One interesting bit, John Dean was Nixon's White House counsel and was the person that we now know framed Nixon as part of being part of a cover-up, which was what caused Nixon to resign. John Dean is still, to this day, a talking head on MSNBC and CNN, as is Bob Woodward. You see how the blob works? Experts. Are you starting to see how many quote-unquote experts aren't merely as impressive as they seemed when we were kids? I used to worship Bob Woodward. Turns out he's a deep state fraud. This might be a great time to revisit the famous episode where Richard Feynman simply and elegantly demonstrates the layers and layers of bullshit from NASA engineers when investigating why the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. Look it up on YouTube. It's a masterpiece. I bet at some point, well, if you won't look it up, I don't think I'm describing it actually. I have the link in the book, but basically he's like, it was an O-ring and it was too cold. And so the O-ring, the rubber doesn't expand properly when it's cold, right? So he had a glass of ice water and then he puts the O-ring in there and he's like, and he pulls it out when his time to talk. And he's like, I think this might have something to do with it. It's just brilliantly done. Go look it up. It's beautiful. But it goes to show how like a whole apparatus can get into this like groupthink mode where they're just like telling themselves lies, and like it's like the emperor's new clothes all over again. Like nobody wants to be the person who says the obvious truth because they're like, well, if everybody else is like thinks this, I'm probably wrong. Like there's this famous experiment too where there's a group of like, I forget how much it is, 10 people, 20 people, whatever, and they have a bunch of lines where like 3 lines where one is obviously longer, and then they're like 19 of these people are, part, like they're actors, and the one person is the subject. And so all the 19 go through like, no, they're like, this one is the longest, this one is the longest. They all say the same one, which is obviously not the longest, is the longest. And then it finally is like your turn, and you're like, are you going to go against all these people even though it's so fucking obvious that they're all wrong? And most people are just going to agree with everybody else. It's crazy how the mind works. And I think it's one of the big distinctions is like, do you trust your own eyes and your own mind? Or do you just like suss out what everybody else thinks and go along with that? Back to the script. I bet at some point you've been part of an organization where you saw groupthink in action. Humans have an incredible capacity to just go along with the consensus, even when their own eyes are showing them that it's obviously false. Holy shit, I'm talking about that experiment right now in the book. God damn it, I keep second guessing myself. All right. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted what has been dubbed the Asch conformity experiments. A group of participants were shown a line and then asked to match it to one of 3 lines of different lengths. Only one person in the group was the actual test subject, while the rest were actors who were instructed to give the wrong answer on certain trials. The actors would unanimously claim that a clearly incorrect line, for example, a line of different length, was the match, and the study observed whether the test subject would conform to the group's incorrect judgment or stick to what they knew to be true. About 75% of participants conformed at least once. This is how powerful the group mind and the desire to comply is. Imagine what happens when the evidence is less clear as it is today, where the media and our governments are intentionally lying, obfuscating, and confusing us. Justice system. People on the right also have little faith in the justice system, which is why you see them shrug their shoulders at Trump now officially being a quote-unquote convicted felon. To the red-pilled right, it's just the same old deep state going after the biggest threat to their decades-long corruption and grift. I was watching a Tucker Carlson interview with a former FTX executive, Ryan Salame, who's going to jail for 7.5 years for donating to Republicans.
I'm no fan of FTX, but the story Ryan tells is incredible. He says that the government prosecutor offered him a deal where if he pled guilty, they wouldn't go after the mother of his children, with whom he was going through a divorce. He took the deal to spare her, only to have them go back on their word. General Michael Flynn, whom the deep state went after aggressively right after Trump got elected, has a similar story. They threatened to go after his son, which made him plead guilty to a crime he didn't believe he committed. In his case, the judge sat on the guilty plea long enough for Flynn to learn. The judge sat on the guilty plea long enough for Flynn to learn new information about his case, and he withdrew his guilty plea. Most crimes do not go to trial. Defendants are warned that going to trial is going to be even costlier and likely to result in a much harsher sentence. There's a legitimate concern that prosecutors and judges collectively want to punish defendants. For insisting their case be heard in court. Even if it does go to trial, a lot can be done in terms of selecting the right jurisdiction with a jury that's predisposed to support the prosecution. And there's a lot of leeway in which lines of questioning are allowed and which witnesses are allowed or not. Ryan from FTX also shares that people wouldn't testify in his defense because they were afraid the government would go after them in retaliation. In his book, 3 Felonies a Day, How the Feds Target the Innocent, Harvey Silverglate documents how there are so many felonies on the books that every person in the US unknowingly commits at least 3 a day just living life. That's exactly how a corrupt government machine wants things, because it gives them a tool that they can wield against anyone who gets in their way anytime they want. Show me the man and I'll show you the crime, as the famous saying goes. And if they cannot convict you, they can probably coerce you into pleading guilty to something you didn't do. And if they can't do that, they can still bankrupt you. It's not a functioning justice system if the government can throw unlimited resources into prosecuting you. It's not a functioning justice system if the government can throw unlimited resources into prosecuting you. And even if you're totally innocent, you will go bankrupt and waste years of your life just trying to defend yourself. And you still might go to jail because of the threats or the cost of fighting. Even if they end up dropping the charges, you don't get your time or your money back. No compensation. Yeah, we ruined your life. Sorry, not sorry. That's not a legal system. It's a shakedown racket. And it gives the government almost unlimited power to intimidate people into compliance. And all that typically happens to the prosecutors if they go after someone on a fraudulent basis is they fail up. They get promoted to an even higher position. In another interview on Tucker Carlson, Harmeet Dillon, a lawyer who has known Kamala Harris for over 20 years, documents the case of David Daleiden, an undercover journalist investigating abortion clinics that were illegally selling aborted fetus parts. According to Dillon, Kamala Harris ignored the First Amendment and custom-made According to Dillon, quote, Kamala Harris ignored the First Amendment and custom-made the first prosecution of a journalist in California history, end quote. That was 7 years ago, and no judge has been willing to pursue the case. So 7 years later, he still has this charge hanging over his head, and he has to spend money to defend himself. He faces years in prison if convicted, and the abortion clinic was never prosecuted for their activities. If this is true, it's quite the allegation, given how the Biden-Harris administration and the media has repeatedly accused Trump of going after journalists. Bottom line is that people on the right don't have a lot of faith in the legal system, and for good reason. They believe a lot of judges are activist judges who are out to pursue their own political agenda rather than honestly administer the law. People on the left believe that the legal system basically works. Sure, there's bad apples, but it's fundamentally sound and is run by good people who would never abuse it for their own political or corrupt ends, at least not on any meaningful scale. The fact that Trump is now a convicted felon and that no fraud has been proven in the 2020 election means that the system is working. It's the difference between the fairy tale version of how we've been taught the system is supposed to work and then all the little details of how it actually works in real life. Details truly matter. You can have the most brilliant laws on the books, but if they're not enforced honestly, they mean nothing.
All right, my friends, that's it for today. Next chapter is going to be Trust in the Media, page 143. Page 143. So that is what's next. Whenever we do this next, Trust in the Media, 143. I'll write it down so I remember. This is fun. Yeah, I hope you're getting something out of it. I wrote this book intending that it provides value for everybody, whether you're on one side of the spectrum or the other side of the spectrum, whether you're just whatever, like that you'll learn something that you can apply in your own life, and that you can apply obviously when you're looking at what's happening in the world of politics, where you can, start to ask some questions. And it really comes down to that coercion experiment. Like, do you trust your own mind? Do you trust your own eyes? Do you trust your own reasoning, or not? And most people don't. That's just the fact of life. It's just how it is. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it's all psychology, right? It's all what's in the minds. So with that, I'm gonna wrap for now. I'll catch you guys in a little bit over a week, and we will do this again. All right. Appreciate you. See ya. Bye.